Hey, what's going on everyone? So in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how I go about creating procedural gobos within Cinema4D and Redshift. Now, if you're not sure what a gobo is just an acronym that stands for go between optics. So ostensibly, whenever you have a light source, the gobo is the object that you would put in front of that light source, which would then obstruct some of the light being emitted and also cast shadows down on, let's say, your 3D scene. They are fantastic to include within your lighting setup if you want to create any dramatic texturing or moody lighting effects. I also love doing them procedurally because the nice thing is once you have it set up once, you can quickly iterate and go about making any changes you want. So let's go on ahead and jump in. Okay, so here's our scene we're going to be working with today. Fairly simple. I'm just going to jump out on my camera to show you guys. So what we're looking at is we have this main target object we're going to be lighting today, which is this bust that I made within ZBrush and I brought it into Cinema. Then for the space itself, we got a cube floor, we got 2 walls, and a camera. That's about it. So for lights, right? This tutorial is all about gobos. So anytime I'm lighting one of these scenes, I always actually like to start with the dome light. The nice thing with the dome light is it just can give you some really quick and easy, just kind of like ambient light within your scene. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna grab a dome light, drop this in. I'm gonna come over here to my object texture tag. So for today's purposes, I am just gonna use a local HDR that I have, but you guys feel free to use whatever you want. But these are actually from C4D. If you guys don't know Pat, go check him out. An amazing sculptor, and he's got some great 3D assets too. So, all right, HDR is loaded. We can see our render viewer over here has kind of updated to reflect that. And then also over here in our perspective view, we can see the HDRI image in the background. So what I'd recommend doing is I'm going to come over here to the coordinates for the HDRI and the dome light, and I'm just going to rotate this around a little bit. And I'm really just kind of looking over in the render view, and this is just kind of a subjective thing, but just trying to find some lighting and ambient shadows and stuff that look interesting. And I don't hate this, right? Like we got a little bit of shadows over here on the back wall, some shadows down here on the floor. This isn't bad. So we're going to kind of go with this and keep it here. So, all right. Last thing I would do, which I forgot, is just for computing power, I'm going to actually turn off the background image just so we don't have to see that. But okay, so dome lights in, it's working, gobo time. So coming back over to our lights, our redshift lights, you know, area lights are always a good go-to for me. But again, when looking at making gobos, I really feel like a spotlight is a great option. So we're going ahead and drop a spotlight in the scene. I'm going to kind of pull this out just a little bit. And so we can see we have this spotlight light source, which is pointed directly at our statue. And over here in the render view, this thing's being blown out. Perfect, is what we need. So now to add the actual gobo, what we're going to do is we're going to insert a plane into the scene. So just knowing with the scene, we need to bring this thing down. It's way too big. So I'm going to go by 12 by 12. You know, just for shits and giggles, let's turn the segments down to 4 by 4, and then we need to change the orientation. So now that's oriented the correct direction, I'm going to kind of move this in front of the sculpt, and so this is perfect, right? So we have our light source over here. We have this plane that we just added into our scene, which is going to become our gobo, which will be our texture for our lighting, and then it's right here in front of our target object. So, you know, the whole thing then when you're kind of compositing these scenes and you're going to be tweaking your lights and, you know, finessing and moving stuff around is I actually like to add a couple tags to both the spotlight and the plane, which will, once you have these in place, they allow you to freely move these around however you like. So what I typically do is I'll go over here in my spotlight and I'm going to go under animation tags and add target. So our target, which is what we want our light to be pointed at for the scene, is going to be our sculpture, right? So I'm going to drag a sculpture down here, target object, boom, done. Next thing is actually going to be our plane. So wherever we end up moving the spotlight, we're going to want our gobo plane to be parented to that. So we can right click on the plane, come down here to rigging tags, and we'll find constraint. Under constraint, there's an option for parent. And then once we have that, we're going to drag our spotlight down to target, and we are all set. So now if we zoom out and let's grab our spotlight and move it, Voila, you have this plane which is following the spotlight, and no matter where we move this, it's always going to be parented to our sculpture, right? Super cool, super easy. It kind of makes for finessing this. Your final composition is super easy. All right, so I'm gonna move this light over here, kind of an interesting spot, maybe down just a little bit more. Okay, so I like this just to kind of, we'll start off. So as we can see here in the Cinema4D perspective view, we have a light source that's pointed down at our model. But over here in Redshift, obviously nothing's being lit because it's being obstructed by this plane. So if I was to turn our plane off, scene lights up, it gets blown out, looks horrible. So what I'm going to actually do right now, since I have that plane turned off, is I'm just going to tweak a couple settings on the spotlight. So I'm going to come down here to the cone angle. I want to maybe change that to 20. All the cone angle does is it just either opens or narrows how wide of a cone, and you can kind of see over on the right and on the left what that's doing. But so I'm going to set that at 20. I'm going to take the intensity down quite a bit, just because we don't need it as bright. Sure, let's just do 23,000. Okay, awesome. So that's looking good. I'm happy with all of that. I like where the light source is hitting the back wall, our main target object, and then this far wall on the floor. So let's go ahead and turn back on our plane, right? Okay, so with our plane, to actually create the gobo, we need to create a new redshift material. So I'm gonna come over here, create a new redshift material. We'll just call this gobo. Let's go ahead and throw it on the plane. So we would double click on the material. It's going to open up our node editor, and just some little housekeeping things. What I would do is I'll grab the material node itself. We do not need a diffuse. We do not need reflections. Just going ahead and turn both of those guys off. So the one node that we're going to add, which is really the meat and potatoes of this whole situation, is a noise node. So if we double click within the editor and we type in noise, if I could type max on noise, this is our guy. So what this node has is it has a ton of these pre-populated noises that Cinema4D basically has at your disposal for you to use. So you can kind of switch between any of these noises. And then the cool thing is you can randomize the seed, you can change the size of it. This is really what makes it all procedural. So we have our noise added to our material. We're also going to add a ramp node. And the ramp node is, since we're working with black and white values, it's basically just going to let us kind of like change and correct those values. So the noise gets pumped into our ramp. Our ramp is then going to get pumped into the material overall opacity. So as soon as that happens, boom, you see over here on the left, our light source is shining through that plane now. And again, we haven't hidden the plane. It's still there. It's just, as you can see, now there's some texture, right? There's like areas within the material that are opaque and other areas that are not. So it's exactly what we want. So we're going to jump back over to the noise node, and I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here, just again, because I know the size of my scene and the size of the sculpture. So the overall scale is going to be a bit high. I'm going to drop this down from 1 to 0.1. And as soon as we do that, you can kind of see over here in the Redshift render viewer, we're getting a little bit of these shadows over here on the back wall, right? Which are pretty cool. Look like you might have like some foliage or, you know, something outside of like a window. And then to darken these a little bit, I'm actually going to come over to my ramp and I'm just going to pull in my white, and boom, right? All of a sudden these become much more dramatic and much more dark. And this is just really kind of like a personal taste thing. So edit as you please and see fit. But really at its core, I mean, that's it, right? We just created a gobo. I mean, I can come back into the noise node itself. Let's say if I want to change the type from wavy turbulence, maybe I want FBM. I mean, that looks super sick, right? You know, you can adjust the scale. Maybe I think the scale and FBM is great, but I just want to change the seed. So then you can kind of just start to scroll through some of these and find something that you think looks interesting, right? Maybe that looks cool. Maybe you don't want to adjust the overall scale, but you're like, I want to really like elongate this thing, so you can just change individual properties, and you get some pretty cool options, right, for how you can kind of lighten your scene. So I think that's it with the first way that I go about creating gobos. So the second way, which actually, I'm just going to throw a null in here, and let's put the spotlight and the plane inside its own null, and we're going to call this light 01. So as I was saying, this is kind of the first way that I go about and create a little bit of lighting texture and drama in my scenes that I'm lighting. But there's another way. So let's say if I really didn't want just like this random texture that kind of looks like foliage, or maybe it's water that's reflecting off of, or, you know, whatever it might be. Maybe if I wanted to like actually like a window pane, right? Super easy to do. So all we're going to do is that whole null that we just combined our gobo and our spotlight in, let's just copy, make a new one. We're going to rename this guy light 02, and then let's turn off our first light. So for this gobo and our plane, we're actually going to remove that texture, right? So remove the texture, it's back to a solid plane, just a physical object in our scene, blocks the light. We notice it over here, right? But for this guy, we actually want to add in an atom array. So what the atom array is going to do is we add our plane to this. It's going to look at the segments for the object, and it's going to create geometry around that. So add it in our atom array. All of a sudden, you can see this huge blocky thing. It's basically because the sphere radius for the atom array is way too big. So let's take us down to 0.1. There you go, man. Automatically, you're seeing like these window panes kind of pushing through, right? And you can kind of see right here in Cinema too, where that's lighting up. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come back over here to my pane. Let's take this maybe down to 6 by 8. And then I'm just going to, again, this is parented to my light, but I can bring this pane in a little bit more, which is going to kind of change some of the shadows that I'm getting within my scene, right? So let's say that like I'm digging this, this looks great. I'm happy with the sphere radius, which again, you could go even smaller with this if you wanted, but let's keep it at 0.1. I like that. Okay, 0.1. 0.1, boom. All right, so the last thing that I would probably do is, again, if you're looking at these shadows, they're a little harsh. I would kind of want to diffuse these out a little bit. So the cool thing that spotlights have is an option. If we click on our spotlight and we go under details, there's a checkbox here for softness effects gobo. So what I want to do is I want to tick that on, and then this slider up here for softness. If I just start to slide this, all of a sudden you can see all of those shadows, all the harshness kind of gets diffused off, and it just looks a little bit more natural. I really love just the general look for it, right? And come back over here to the spotlight. Maybe if I want to bring this cone angle actually up a little bit more, maybe I want to take the intensity down even more. But all of a sudden you get these really interesting kind of shadows and lighting effects and textures for your scene, right? And then the cool thing with this is you can do as many of these as you want. So let's turn back on our first one, which kind of had all of our randomized shadows and textures. You know, I might want to, let's say that I actually want to move the first one that we did. I'm going to come maybe over this way a little bit. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's perfect. I mean, this is all a little bit of just kind of playing and seeing what you're happy with. Let's go to that first spotlight. We as well want to affect our gobos and kind of soften these. And yeah, there you go, man. I mean, you get a pretty cool looking scene. I mean, we can come back into the texture. We can go back over that max on noise. We can change the seed of this and, you know, just try to find something that we're really happy with. But it's as easy as this. You just can nickel and dime your way through here. Let's do a little bucket render. It's super quick, super easy, and non-destructive. So I hope you guys have liked this tutorial. If you happen to have any questions, feel free to throw them down into the comments, whether pertaining to this specific video, or maybe there's some other questions you have just with lighting and compositing within Cinema or Redshift. Happy to answer them. So please like and subscribe. And yeah, appreciate you guys checking out.